we go into a lot of great detail because the carnal mind has perverted the scriptures in a way that causes us to not know God.
Yeah.
But if you notice, out of every explanation I've ever gave, everything I've ever said is always pointing to the goodness of God and explaining how the places where we think we see God not being good, that's not what's really going on there. Every single message I've ever preached, right? Because I'm not after you engaging in some spiritual disciplines. I'm not after you trying to do some things to advance the cause of the church. I'm after you having a relationship with God, and whatever comes out of your intimacy with God, glory to God, man, I just want to be a part of that, right? I want to experience that with you, through you, and in you, and vice versa, right?
That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. I mean, when you come to understand and come to grips with the fact that God is only ever good, that changes who you are.
Oh, yeah.
And people, people that think carnally, you say God is only ever good, and they'll go, oh yeah, fine. And then they'll turn right around and say, but he killed everybody in the flood, right?
Yeah.
They don't do the critical thinking to align their thought processes, because God can't be both. He has to be one or the other, and he's only ever good to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the way it's great what you bring up. The way we were with the flood, we were like Job. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. We looked at the flood, we read it in the scriptures, and we come to the conclusion God killed those people.
Yes.
And then God comes out of a whirlwind in Jesus to question our answers. He draws a contradiction in the sand about our knowledge of God and what God looks like in Him. Because we don't see what we thought God looked like in the Old Testament manifesting in Jesus. We don't see the same thing. In fact, we see what looks like a contradiction.
Yeah.
There's a reason why that's the way. Because He comes out of a whirlwind to question our answers, just like God came to question Job. So that we could come to the place where we could say, you know what, God, you're right. I never knew you. I'd only heard about you from church and from religion and from what other people said about you. I never really knew you. Then you start thinking, this is God. What's going on there?
Exactly.
Now you start going to look at it, and I love what Beulah pointed out. We were hammering the flood on Wednesday night's Bible study. Man, what Maurice said about Revelation, all of a sudden, you notice how we're seeing the truth in all these different verses?
Yeah.
And then Beulah comes and says, you know what? It says that the 8 were saved by the water. They were saved.
Yeah.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we view the water as a destructive thing. It says they were saved.
And the water represents the water of baptism, which saves us.
Yeah.
Right.
There's something about the water there that brought destruction to some, to those who were unbelieving, but salvation to those who believe.
Right. And so the fact that it's saved, though, shows the heart of God was to save.
That's right.
It wasn't to destroy the people. The people stored up for themselves destruction because they wouldn't get on the boat.
Right.
Noah spent 500 years telling them God was going to send water to save them from their suffering, and He didn't want them to perish with the corruption in the earth. And so God was having them build this ark to save them from the destruction, but they loved the darkness more than they loved the light. And they wouldn't get on the boat. But the water came to save mankind. It didn't come to destroy mankind. It came to destroy what was destroying mankind.
Right.
Just like the Gospels talk about hell and the lake of fire being made for the devil and his angels. Not for humans.
Right.
But humans will store up for themselves the same end that's coming in the lake of fire. So God's coming with the light of His life to consume death and darkness and the serpent. He doesn't want anybody to perish.
No.
But some will love darkness more than they love the light. And they will store up for themselves the same end. That doesn't mean God's the one who destroyed them.
Right.
They destroyed themselves. They condemned themselves. Right? See, once you see that God come and questioned our answers. We had all these answers about God in the Old Testament. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. The Lord kills people for sin. The Lord is the one that punishes for sin.
Right.
He's the condemner of the sinners. Why do you think the Pharisees were so upset that Jesus was hanging out with the sinners? Their view of God is that God wouldn't be hanging out with the sinners. God would be killing the sinners.
Right.
And Jesus comes to play patty cake with the sinners. God, the friend of sinners.
That's right.
Right? And He questions our answers. And it's like, boom, here's the contradiction now. does your view of God line up with what was manifested in Jesus? Because Jesus is God. And if it doesn't, then you want to allow your questions about God from the Old Testament to be answered. Right? And you want to go with what was revealed in Jesus.
You know, with what Maurice said, is that